How are you? So we all set? Good morning. My name is Will Luzier. I'm the former campaign manager for the Yes on 4 campaign to tax and regulate marijuana. We're here today to say that 1.8 million voters of Massachusetts have waited long enough for adult use retail cannabis shops to open. Now is the time for the Cannabis Control Commission to move forward with the voters' mandate. The voters of Nevada legalized adult use cannabis in November of 2016, the same day as Massachusetts, and the adult use shops have been opened there since July of 2017, 15 months ago. The voters of California legalized adult use cannabis in November of 2016, the same day as Massachusetts, and the adult use shops have been open there since January of 2018, 9 months ago. The fiscal year 2019 state budget projected $63 million in revenue beginning July 1st. That means that every day that this retail commerce is not fully operative, $176,200 is lost. For the 92 days that this commerce has not been operative, this is a loss of almost $16 million. July 1st, 2018 has been characterized as a target date, but every day that this commerce is thwarted moves us farther and farther away from that target. And I note here that there was an article in the Worcester Telegram yesterday, and the lead was, "The wait goes on." Once the CCC authorizes a handful of retail locations, that doesn't mean they can open. Labs must be licensed, retail locations must submit it to a second inspection, and register and background checks of all their employees. There are 78 proposed retail locations that have submitted at least one application, and 46 under review, with dozens more expected once city and town moratoria expire. The Cannabis Control Commission needs to pick up the pace. We're not here for cannabis operators. We're here for the consumers and voters of the Commonwealth who don't understand why this is taking so long. Almost every day, folks who are not involved in the process ask me, what's taking so long? The delay is eroding their already skeptical government. In sum, now is the time to get them open. And now Jim Borgasani, the former communications director for the campaign, has a few words to say.
Test. Hi. One thing during the campaign, we constantly stressed that we did not want general legalization to have the same rollout structure that medical marijuana had in Massachusetts. We're all aware of the slow rollout, the troubled rollout of medical marijuana. We wanted to avoid that. I would say there were three primary factors in that slow rollout. The first was a torpid and overly bureaucratic regulatory agency. The second was prejudiced indifference from the governor and top legislative leaders. And the third was a triumvirate of obstruction prohibitionists, a triumvirate of the Mass Municipal Association, municipal law firms, and prohibitionist local officials. I'm seeing this structure starting to repeat itself now, and I think it's very troubling. I hope that the Cannabis Control Commission does not become the torpid, overly bureaucratic regulatory authority that we saw the Department of Public Health become, and that delayed the rollout, and that prevented all of the medical marijuana patients from getting access to convenient medical cannabis. I fear that we're starting to see the same structure. We definitely see it in the last two that I mentioned. The governor has provided no leadership whatsoever. He doesn't even mention it. I don't think he cares if there's no rollout. The Mass Municipal Association, various municipal law firms are basically telling towns, ask for far more than the legislative rewrite says you can, because you're going to get it. That is slowing everything down, along with the lack of moving forward with the licensing, as Will mentioned. So that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce Blake Mency, who is an attorney working with Cannabis Commerce, trying to help them through the licensing process.
Thank you, Will. I think this all started when the Cannabis Control Commission failed to prioritize the licensing of testing labs at the outset. There was an 11th hour emphasis of the prioritization of the review of those applications. It seems fairly obvious at the outset that a retail store could not possibly open unless its products were tested. So I just think that the Cannabis Control Commission may not have intentionally dropped the ball there, but I think it's clear that they did in failing to prioritize that particular license type. As Will just said, this is far past time. We have had time to responsibly roll this out, and the clock is ticking, and I think Massachusetts voters are losing patience. So hopefully there's action in the very near future to get this industry up and running once and for all. Thank you very much.
And I just wanted to mention one thing. Just an example of one operator, one applicant that we're aware of. This applicant submitted their application on June 1st, the first day they could. There were some minor questions that were asked by the Cannabis Control Commission. Those questions were answered. The Cannabis Control Commission notified this applicant on September 21st that their application was complete. So that's almost 90 days, if not more. Now, from September 21st, the 90-day clock begins for their approval process. So possibly that goes into December. That's too long for a single applicant of a dispensary, a fairly uncomplicated application. Something like that is just an indication that perhaps the bureaucracy is moving too slowly there, and we have to see that improve. The Cannabis Control Commission cannot move forward with the sort of mindset that they're foisting something that the people of Massachusetts don't want. The Massachusetts voters voted for this by a fairly large margin. So, we'll see what happens in the next coming months, but we're very worried that, again, we're seeing a repeat of the slow rollout of medical cannabis in Massachusetts. Any questions, please?
You blame the governor, Will talked about the governor, you talked about the governor's lack of safety here. What about the legislation? They rewrote the entire law to require
Yeah, I think I mentioned legislative leaders. Not only are they not even pushing for quicker license approval, but yes, the legislative rewrite added another obstruction to this. We heard all the time, we want to do this right. And the implication was the law that was passed by voters somehow wasn't right. But I can guarantee you this, the law that was passed by voters actually was in effect. You wouldn't see a lot of the host community agreement obstructions because there was not a mandatory host community agreement in place. The legislature put that in place, but they didn't think through that what an obstruction that would become, and they didn't put a timeline on it. So yes, the legislative rewrite, not to mention the 6-month delay, right at the start of it, added to the great delay that we're seeing. So yes, they deserve some blame as well.
My name is Ed D'Souza. I speak on behalf of small businesses of the state. My name is Ed D'Souza, and I speak on behalf of the small business.
Thank you. My name's Ed D'Souza. I speak on behalf of the small businesses in this state. I, like many others, have gone for a micro license. And on top of the Cannabis Control Commission issues, we also face issues on the municipal level. I have personally spent over 2 years working out the zone in Newburyport, applying for special permit, and doing everything only to be ousted by Reefer Madness. One person kicked my company out of the warehouse I've been leasing for over a year. Like I said, I speak for many other businesses, so it's not even a matter of the Cannabis Control Commission having the lack of resources to do their job, but there's still a stigma out there for small businesses who are trying to get off their feet. For example, a small 4-person business, 4 people taking seconds on their house in order to fund things, competing with large conglomerates, it's very tough in this state. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for doing your jobs.
Do you think that any business have families on like rent subject to either against the cannabis control commission or against the or not?
Andy, I certainly think that they have standing, but the problem is, does anyone want to sue the city that they're seeking to get approval for their host community agreement? So, it puts those potential applicants in a very awkward position with regard to being able or having standing to sue.
Well, is there any thought or any fear that one of the 5 members of the Cannabis Control Commission voted against the law back in 2016? Do you think that's having any impact on it?
I think that what Jim said is more important. At least 3 of those folks are long-time government employees. And I think that there is a bureaucratic and institutional inertia that's happening here that happened with the DPH, and we're also fearful that that's exactly what's happening here is, government, the excuse is government doesn't move fast, but it moves right. But in this case, it should move fast. Other questions?
Do you think they're dragging their feet? They're purposeful, or are they being measured and careful? That's what they say. They're being measured, careful. They don't want to make any mistakes.
I don't think they're dragging their feet. I think that, and as the Worcester Telegram article points out, I don't think they have enough staff. And so, and that may well be, understaffing may well be an issue that this building can deal with and should deal with. And the leadership should make sure that they have enough staff so that they can move forward more quickly.
And one thing too, I think both at the Cannabis Control Commission level and local officials, I think look at this like it's plutonium, like it's something that is deeply threatening to towns and society. And that's just, I think, a mindset that I would like to see the Cannabis Control Commission do more to offset. And I don't think it's happening enough, frankly. They have to look at this as the way Massachusetts voters looked at it as something that they want it regulated like alcohol. It's less dangerous than alcohol. Get away from the stigma of this being so dangerous. Again, the plutonium sort of approach that are taking, many officials have taken. So, it's going to be years before we get to full normalization, but I'd like to see the leaders of the state and the Cannabis Control Commission start moving that way.
So you reject the gateway drug
We
theory?
utterly reject the gateway drug theory. There's no scientific evidence for that. The earliest good studies on cannabis from the 1930s with Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia in New York. His panel said there's no such thing as the gateway. It's simply a term that's used by prohibitionists and by other people who frankly don't know a lot about it, but they've heard that term. The first thing they say, well, it's a gateway. It's not. There's no scientific evidence that it's a gateway to anything.
What would you like to see from the legislature?
I would like to see them, first of all, relook at the host community agreements. Make it clear. I've seen legislative leaders make clear to the Cannabis Control Commission that they have power to moderate or to regulate those host community agreements. I think they have to revisit that. I know Mark Cusack and Pat Jalen, chairman and chairwoman of the marijuana committee, have told the Cannabis Control Commission they have that authority, but it may take more than just telling them. I think they have to have some action. That's just on the host community agreement. And if it's a funding issue, if the Cannabis Control Commission says we simply don't have the staff to move these applications through as quickly as they should move through, and we're not looking for just wholesale approval, but we want timely approval. That's not too much to ask. Then the legislature should provide them the budget that they need. So really, a lot of it comes down to budget, and a lot of it comes down to looking at the mistakes that they made in their rewrite and correcting those mistakes.
Talking about being problematic from the city and town standpoint. I talked to a couple of people who are amenable host community agreements, that they weren't held up for anything, that they weren't asked for anything beyond it, and don't even have to pay up to 3%. Is the problem maybe more the industry than it is the host? You know, you've got companies coming in there and offering tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, there are some, but I've heard many communities that are asking for exorbitant terms in their host community agreement. So the few that you've heard, I think, are offset by the many that are asking for much more.
100-year agreements. That's what I was asked for.
There's an example. You know, that's pretty exorbitant. The evidence we've seen from, you know, the Boston Globe put out a story that they listed a bunch of host community agreements they had seen. I think almost every one of those exceeded the state law. So, you know, and I think the operators are kind of on the hook. They don't want to criticize any of the towns that Will mentioned, as Will mentioned, that they're looking for community agreements to move forward. You know, it's just going to put them in a tight spot. So,
Do you have a goal on when you'd like to see the first retail establishments open up?
July 1st.
yeah, July 1st was
January
a dream.
Are you calling on them? Are you setting a deadline?
I would like to set any deadline I could set would be artificial. I would like to see something open by October 15th. I think the people of Massachusetts, the people that voted for this, deserve that, frankly. The cannabis consumers deserve access to safe product just like every other consumer has in Massachusetts. And right now they're not getting that. So again, what we don't want to see is a repeat of the medical marijuana rollout. And structurally, that's what we're looking at right now. That's our fear.
What should the Cannabis Commission have done or not done, in your opinion, in order to have accelerated this process?
Well, one thing they could have done, perhaps, was to make sure the legislature knew that they needed more staff, with more money to pay for more staff. If that is an issue, my understanding is, you know, that might be an issue. The other thing they could do maybe was to not treat. I mentioned, I don't know if you were here, Mike, I mentioned earlier a timeline for one applicant that was extremely long. You know, it was almost more than 90 days just until they were told that they had a full submission. And then now that 90-day clock starts again for the approval process. We're looking at potentially 6 months for an approval for this applicant, which is a small dispensary, not even cultivation and manufacturing. So I think maybe they have to look at their bureaucratic structure and how they're approving these. Are they going too slow? Are they being too strict on certain elements of the applications that, frankly, we don't see duplicated in any other business application in Massachusetts? So I would say that there's a few of the things there. You know, I'm not inside the Cannabis Control Commission, so none of us can say this is what they're doing on a daily basis, or this is not what they're doing on a daily basis. But one thing we're worried about is an overly bureaucratic agency that just moves too slow and moves slower than the voters in Massachusetts desired.
Do you even have any hope that the Cannabis Control Commission will even turn its attention this year to delivery services for the cannabis decade on the cannabis consumer?
Yeah, in fact, I do. At their October 4th meeting on Thursday, they're going to address the issue of social consumption. So they've been studying it since they considered it back in May, and they said they would study it until October. And then 2 weeks after that, at their October 18th meeting, they're going to revisit the issue of home delivery. So they're going to indicate what those studies have turned up, and then I think they anticipate that by February they will have draft regulations, then they'll have public hearings and move forward with that if they determine they should.
Dan, one more thing I wanted to mention. You asked what I would like from the legislature. One thing I think they should look at is to put a timeline on host community agreements. Yeah. In other words, when they receive, or there should be legislation that says when a town receives a request to begin negotiations for a host community agreement, the town has either 30 days or 60 days to move forward. Because we are seeing towns that are just not negotiating, are just not moving forward. And there's nothing that says they have to. So they made it mandatory that these agreements be be part of the application packet. They should also put a timeline on it so that towns aren't allowed to drag their feet and just keep businesses out of town simply by not moving forward with the HCA's. So that's a technical detail that I think they could correct.
Any more questions? Thank you so much for coming.